So we should we should we should explain why we did this film, because that's usually the thing that people
Ask the most.
want to know. So I have my reason why. Do you guys have
Okay.
your answer
Yeah.
to that one?
Yeah,
Because
well,
we
you
always
go-
get asked that
you
question,
go-
right?
You
go
go
first.
first,
My
yeah.
my
'cause
answer
it's-
is-
you're the mastermind.
For me, it was mostly because I'd never heard of it done, and I was aware that a lot of people are adverse to watching black and white movies today.
Right.
So that I got this idea that less and less people were watching, older movies.
Classics.
Whereas like when I was growing up, I mean, you'd watch, the Marx Brothers, you'd watch WC, all these
Right.
different. And even then, I mean, they had their own distance. There's a distance. You didn't particularly know a lot about silent movies, and so there's like all these distances of technology. Silents were often even played on television at normal speed because they didn't have projectors that ran 16 frames. Our knowledge of silence is that they're moving fast, they're funny, and they move fast. When in fact they weren't designed to do that at all.
Right.
They were shot at a slower speed, and they were supposed to be projected at a slower speed. So in fact, they didn't move faster at all. But technology was so distant that in the 50s, when they're showing them on TV, they just said,
They
"Oh,
didn't
it's a
even
funny
have the
old movie,"
equipment. Wow.
So like, they're just funny anyway. So we don't really care whether they're the right speed or not. Okay, so if I can remember this,
You were saying how like you
of
watched it on TV.
why I was interested in doing this film at all, because I think one of the reasons was that I was becoming aware of this distance that films of like 1959 had to an audience of today, a younger audience. And although this is sort of like the Coca-Cola of 1960 movies, it's like very prominent. It's like almost, it's a famous picture.
Right.
Even then, people know it or seem to know it kind of as the icon rather than, literally seeing the whole movie from beginning to end. And this is my theory, which I haven't necessarily, proven or disproven. But I thought of it in the same way, the distance being similar to, say, an audience in 1960 watching silent movies. They might know Birth of a Nation, but most of them had never sat there and watched the whole, 2.5 hour or 2 hour movie
Right.
before, even though it was like the icon of that period of time.
That's a pretty strange film too.
That's a really strange film.
The Klan.
And this
the
is a
Klan
strange
is
film.
the Klan is the hero of that film.
Yeah, I know, and made by a Kentuckian, and so I was under the impression that there was a distance between like a silent movie from 1960 to an audience of 1998, and that was one thing. And the other thing was
To bridge that gap between,
well,
okay, kids
to
aren't
have
going
a
to
reason
watch this.
to
but-
have a reason to really be remaking a film. It's like that was one of the reasons.
Right.
Of like, well, people haven't necessarily seen it, even though it's very iconographic.
Right. I never had. I saw
You'd
it the
never
night
seen it,
before I
yeah.
met you. Yeah.
So that was one reason. The other reason was what would happen if you literally followed in the footsteps of any film,
Right.
whether it was, modern film. Like if you had we had a choice of like what to redo.
So many are remakes now, we can't come up with any originals.
I mean, you could do any film. You could have remade Fargo, which is only 2 years ago. And
Right.
what would that be like
Right,
if
right,
you
right.
followed every single line and cut?
Absolutely.
Would it be Fargo or would it be something different?
Right.
So my question was, would it be the same film? Would it actually be Psycho if you took every single piece and connected it together? Would it in fact be the same film?
And what did you find?
And I found that that it wasn't the same film because it was because of all the stuff that we do to actually make the new film. It completely changed it, and we weren't really. I mean, I guess if we had gone back to where we started, and one of the questions was whether we were supposed to be mimicking
right.
the actors. Like if you again wanted it to be the same film, maybe we could have done other things, like for instance casting people that look exactly like the originals, and mimicking everything.
And,
even
right,
then,
not making even our characters modern at all.
No.
Right.
But then even then there would be, since you're in the act of remaking it, it's just not the same. You can never really get there, so it's not in fact the same. It's something like the same thing. It's like a
Right.
it's like a restaging of a play. I mean, we had such a great example that our objective was to reproduce the movie. So
Right.
we had this great example to work from.
Right.
On an ordinary, every other movie I've worked on, nobody really knows what the end result's supposed to be. In this
Right.
case, you knew. So it maybe was more fun in the sense that you weren't dreading being incorrect as far as like what your decision was about that thing that you just decided, because it wasn't going to add up into the original that was unseeable. In this case, you would know already because you'd say, should we do this or not? Think about it. Know the end result was Hitchcock's end result, yes or no, and proceed, you know. There's a whole thing in our culture which is there's this whole, like a huge sports mentality, which is if you're doing Psycho, that means you're challenging the original filmmaker, you know, which is what all the hubbub was about.
Right.
For some reason, it's a challenge, you know, it's like a wrestling match.
Right.
Like, I challenge you. And that wasn't
And you
really
weren't
on
doing
my
that at
mind.
all.
It wasn't on my mind really, but that's the way it plays the culture.
Right.
Because the culture is into, like,
The competition.
It's like when two movies come out, USA Today prints the grosses, and the one that grosses the most money is the winner.
Right.
Whether or not, like, you know, the critics, who cares? It's
Who
like,
cares?
it's the winner.
Right.
And so in that whole, like, mindset, you know, it's seen as a challenge, and it's like, you know, responded to as that, generally.